wedding day, I think Charlotte ended up trying to escape and get over the wall so that she could leave and not have to marry George. But I'm like, girl, where are you going? Like, in reality though, where are you going? What is up, you guys? Welcome back to the channel. It's your girl JD here, back with another video, and we are now going to be finally talking about Queen Charlotte, which is basically a spin-off from the show Bridgerton over on Netflix. It actually came out earlier this month and I was bursting at the seams to talk about it as soon as I binge watched it. Okay, I have no shame in this game. I had to do it, okay? Basically, I watched the entire season probably within a day. From start to finish, I started in the morning, ended in the evening. I was committed, okay? Very committed. So this actually got announced as a project that they're working on putting out this year, back in 2021. And after they did the Bridgerton season 2, I think that came out last year, I was very ecstatic to see when they were going to be putting out, obviously, Queen Charlotte, and also when they were going to be putting out another season of Bridgerton, because I'm addicted at this point, okay? It is what it is. But I would like to talk about the cast first off, and then we are going to go into the storyline, what happened, the characters, the plots, all that good stuff, and also my thoughts at the end. So let's hop right into it. So this was basically supposed to be a story about Queen Charlotte from the Bridgerton series. Basically, they were going back in time to obviously tell more of the Queen's story. So because they went back in time, they did of course need to find a few actors that would play the younger versions of the older characters that we see in the Bridgerton series. So I'm going to talk about them first. So we have India Raya. Hopefully I'm saying that name right. India Raya Amartifio. I'm probably botching it. I'm so sorry if I am, but I'm just gonna call her India. She's playing the young Queen Charlotte. And then we have Corey Malcrest or Malcrest playing the young George or young King George. Young Agatha is played by Arsema Thomas. Young Grimsley, he's played by Sam Clement. And then Augusta, who's supposed to be playing the mom to King George, she's played by Michelle Fairley. And then we have Lord Herman, who's played by Cyril Neri? I don't know how to pronounce that. So of course we have our returning characters from the Bridgerton series. We have Golda Rochevelle, who's playing Queen Charlotte, as we already know. And then of course we have Ruth Gemmell, who's playing Lady Violet. How do you pronounce it? Adjoa Endo? Is that how you say Adjoa Endo? She's playing the older version of Lady Agatha. Hugh Sachs, who's playing Brimsley, and Tunji Kasim, or Kasim, who's playing Adolphus, supposed to be Queen Charlotte's brother. So let's dive into it. Like I said, it was released on May 4th, and I think I started watching it that day. What day was that? I think that was a week later because I had actually forgotten about it. So yeah, but anyways, I saw that it was on Netflix and it was available and I was like, ooh, yes. So I watched the whole thing in a day. It was directed by Tom Verica and produced by Anna O'Malley. It basically, like I said, explains the story of Queen Charlotte, but of course we saw a little bit of that here and there in the Bridgerton series, but we didn't really get to see too much. Obviously we know she's the queen, she's married to King George. King George has a mental illness that he's dealing with, so we don't really get to see him all that much. But of course, this story, it really goes in deep. Now, before we hop into the storyline, we're gonna point out the obvious, okay? I have to say it's the obvious because it really is the obvious. Obviously, this is supposed to be a work of fiction. However, here and there, they do actually use details from the actual Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg-Strelitz, use pieces of her life and put it into the Queen Charlotte show. Now, we know that Queen Charlotte, the real one, wasn't black. Okay, but we pointed that out on several occasions. I feel like people have even commented on that fact, like, oh, she's white. And it's just like, okay, but Bridgerton is known to be fictional. Like, all of it is fictional. It is okay. You know what I mean? The fact that she's black, it kind of became an issue a little bit, I guess, here and there. But either way, real Queen Charlotte, yeah, she was white. She and George did have actually 15 kids. I believe it was 15, but it was a hefty amount of kids. So that part was real. And then also the fact that, like I said already, King George had a mental illness that he was dealing with, where he would kind of be in and out of it. When it came to reality, kind of lost touch with it on occasion. And then it just got progressively worse through time. So they did have to eventually, at least the real King George, they had to relieve him of his kingly duties, and I think someone else had to step in. I think one of their sons had to step in as, you know, the filler. With all that being said, this story is taking place in the 18th century, which is pretty much on par with what, you know, the actual story, what time frame we're working with there. So the actual Queen Charlotte, she lived from 1744 to 1818. So I think that's pretty lengthy for the time period, because a lot of people was dying pretty young back then still. I'm getting off track here. Let's hop into the story. Open up. The first scene is supposed to be in the present with the older present day Queen Charlotte, and she is trying to console her son who just lost his wife and child. I think the wife was giving birth and she ended up dying during childbirth along with the child. So everyone is supposed to be in grieving mode. However, it does seem like Charlotte is a little disconnected from her family and children, and obviously she wants to feel sorry for them. However, it's just like we kind of have our duties though. You know what I mean? As the royal family, we kind of need to produce an heir so that our lineage could keep going. So that's the obvious. However, it does come across as very cold, you know? But the thing is, we do see that even in her younger years, that was kind of the thing, you know, that was kind of her personality back then as well, so it didn't really change too much. But there was literally a point where, you know, she was trying to console where she was trying to console the son because he was crying, and she was just like, sorrows, prayers. That was my favorite part. I even did a TikTok to that sound. I'll put it in the video, but it was so funny to me. Sorrows, prayers. So moving forward though, her kids do kind of come to her about the whole having an heir thing, getting married and all this type of stuff. And they're just like, listen, you're putting a lot of pressure on us. Even though it's 15 of us, yes, you should have your heir by now, but it's not as though we're not trying. We're trying to have kids. It's just that we're actually losing them. And that's when she was just like, oh, why didn't you tell me? You know, she has that kind of moment with her kids. That's kind of later on into the show, but that's kind of where it opens up, is when, you know, they're at the funeral. Shortly after this is when we go into the younger years, or Charlotte's younger years, and we see that she's on her way to meeting King George's mom, and basically kind of like, I guess, her supposed what do you call them? People who give you advice for things. I don't know if they were government officials or what. They were kind of there almost every time talking to King George's mom. So it was just kind of like, okay. Young Queen Charlotte, she comes in, and she could already tell that what she was bringing to the table did not seem to really please or be enough for the, I guess, what do you call it, Queen Mother? I don't know, because I can't just keep saying, you know, King George's mom. But anyways, let's call her by her character's name, Augusta. Okay, so Augusta, she's basically telling Charlotte, oh, you're gonna have to wear this dress, you're gonna have to look like this, but you look okay to marry my son, basically, you know. But you can already tell based on the conversation that Charlotte had in the carriage on the way to meet Augusta, the one that she had with Adolphus, her brother, about the whole situation. You could tell that she was already coming from an inferior type of background maybe, but they never throughout the show really made it clear as to what made them inferior. It just seemed as though it was about something, maybe class, it could be race, I don't know, you know what I'm saying? It was just really weird. And even when Agatha's character comes up later on in the season, that also becomes another point of conversation. It's that this feeling of being inferior, you know what I mean? And not being wanted in that circle. So it was very strange. I think that Augusta had already made it a point to discuss, at least with the advisors or whatever, that she was very different from them, and that whatever George likes is what is okay with them. I was like, okay. But on the wedding day, I think Charlotte ended up trying to escape and get over the wall so that she could leave and not have to marry George. But I'm like, girl, where are you going? Like, in reality though, where are you going, right? So she was trying to get over this wall, and in so doing, she ended up meeting George. I think we end up seeing his point of view of that day as well, because that was pretty stressful for him too. They meet, and obviously she's just like kind of stunned by the fact that he actually looks decent, because she was worried that he was gonna be hideous and be mean, but he ends up being the complete opposite, and she, you know, falls in love, yada yada. But after the wedding is when it gets kind of weird, okay? Because George starts acting strange because he doesn't want to be in the same bed, let alone the same castle with Charlotte, okay? He does not want to be anywhere near Charlotte for like weeks on end. He just disappears. They have a little bit of an argument, and after a while she's just like, you know what, you just leave, you know what I mean? It's okay, just go. The thing is, she finds out later on that it was because of his illness, but no one had told him that he was ill. They were trying to hide it from everybody and make it seem like he was okay, but it just, yeah, it ended up coming out. However, after a while of ignoring her, you know, because they needed to consummate the marriage, which was very important back in the day. It was basically like y'all weren't even married if y'all didn't consummate it, okay? So yeah, wink wink, right? George was trying to run away from doing that because I guess the intimacy kind of scared him because of his illness, right? Because he wasn't sure if Charlotte was going to be able to accept him as he was. So he was trying to fix himself to come back to be with Charlotte. However, when it comes to mental illness, you can't really fix yourself. You just have to live with that and find some way to deal with what you're dealing with, you know? So at some point, okay, Charlotte does become pregnant, okay, with their first child. And shortly after she gets pregnant with their first child, I believe George had ended up leaving again. And this time it was a lot longer. So she was like, what is happening? Like, genuinely, what is happening? What I think is so interesting, that the first time it happened, he didn't actually just come back to her. She had to go and get him. Yeah. So she had to go to this man's house, find him in his little bubble looking at the stars. She's just like, no, you're going to be coming back with me. So it definitely shows her character as being very, like, not forceful, but very assertive. Like, you're gonna do what I say. Like, I'm tired of this foolishness, basically, you know? So that's when he came back home with her and they consummated, and then she eventually got pregnant with their first kid. But when he leaves for the second time, it was shortly after George had gotten told by the person who was actually experimenting on him. I think Augusta had sought after some help from some people who were in the whole medical bubble, and they were trying to figure out a solution for George's, you know, illness, but they couldn't figure out what it was. And that's when Augusta had found this man who claimed that, you know, his new way of doing things was going to help George, but it really just made it worse, if I'm going to be honest. It was basically like him torturing George, but we're going to get into that later. So during that time, the first time now that George had been missing, he was actually working with this doctor to try and supposedly fix himself. Around the time that Charlotte had pretty much come to his house and told him that you're coming back with me, that's when George had told this supposed doctor that he was done with his treatments and basically torture, right? And the doctor was trying to convince him like, hey, you're still not ready, you should continue with the treatment. But the thing is, there was no like improvement. He was pretty much the same person with the same problem. We move on, and after George finds out that they're having a child and expecting for the first time, George goes off again. And that's when he goes back to the doctor and they basically resume where they stopped, okay? And he continues to get tortured for a while. He just barely came back in time for Charlotte to have their first kid. It was like, what are you doing, George? What are you doing? But anyway, so Charlotte gets pregnant again. And I think it was around that second pregnancy, Charlotte does see how bad things kind of are with George. And I think that's when she does decide to approach, I think, Augusta, his mom, about the situation, and them not really disclosing his illness as a part of the information about him. So that was interesting in itself. And then, of course, Brimsley, okay, her hand, I guess Queen's hand, or I don't know what to call him, like his actual position. But Brimsley has to basically convince King George, or George's hand, I guess, his helper or whatnot. Forgot his name. Jeez, it was Brimsley and Reynolds. Reynolds was the king's assistant, I guess, is what you could kind of call him. But yeah, they were actually in a relationship. They would mess around with each other whenever they did have time with each other. Obviously, you know, because of the time period with them being gay, it's just not even probable for them to have a relationship out in public. It's more of like a just private thing. Also, we bring in Lady Agatha, who was another interesting character. She becomes pretty close with the Queen shortly after, I guess, the Queen needed someone. This was shortly after Charlotte had gotten married to George, and I think this was around the time that George was still kind of acting funny and disappeared on her, so she was kind of lonely in the palace or wherever she was staying. And that's when she called Agatha and was like, hey, I need like some company, you know? And that's pretty much how they got to talking. And I think that's also how she learned about sex and how to consummate the marriage. It was a lot, child. She was kind of like her older sister in a way. I gotta be honest though, Arsema, who plays the younger Lady Agatha, she is gorgeous. But anyways, with all that being said, let's move on. I'm getting distracted, but she's really pretty. After all of this craziness with George, you know, goes down, basically Agatha is trying to make it a point to get her husband, who is Lord Herman. She doesn't really care for the marriage. It was more of like a, you know, just trying to get up in life, trying to get a step up in terms of status. It wasn't really a matter of I like you. It was just more of like a status move, okay, on her parents' part. She had some kids for him, but you could really tell based on whenever they interacted with each other and had to, you know, have sex, she was not into that marriage. She was not into that relationship. And also when he died, he died while having sex with her. And she was just like, oh my God, am I finally free? It was so funny. Not funny that he died, okay, but just the whole situation, the way she reacted to her husband dying, it was like, what is happening? But then again, throughout the whole show and the episodes, you see that she loathes this man, okay? Like she prefers to be by herself at this point. So she here and there has conversations throughout the show with Charlotte to try and get her to understand that you are like the first one of our kind to be able to become queen. And I find it so interesting, again, that they do talk about this whole us, like us against them. And I'm still wondering, is it a matter of status or is it a matter of race? Because it never really gets clarified. I am thinking that it might be a race thing, but you know, let's keep it pushing. She, you know, tries to get Charlotte to do things for her, favors every now and again. And I think eventually, I can't remember if it was Charlotte or Augusta that gave the Lord and Lady title to her and her husband, Agatha anyway. But either way, they end up being Lord and Lady. And of course, you know, Agatha and Charlotte, they end up getting pretty close as well. But shortly after Agatha's husband, Lord Herman, dies, she does start up an affair, believe it or not, with, we find out, Lady Violet's dad. Yeah, so she didn't even know her dad was cheating on her mom to begin with until she actually found in Agatha's house a party hat. And it was the same type of party hats that her dad and her used to make, or maybe just her dad used to make for her. And she just knew automatically when she saw that party hat in Agatha's house, she was like, oh no, hell no. Agatha was like a revelation. And I think this had to have been after Lady Violet's husband died. So it might have been after season 2 of Bridgerton in terms of timeline. It did seem like it was going to be confusing if they didn't do that. So I'm happy that they made that timeline decision. Agatha and Violet, I think Violet kind of knows close to the end of the show that obviously her dad was cheating with Agatha, but I think she just doesn't really care because her mom, if I'm going to be honest, was kind of annoying. So she just was kind of like, I guess, giving her a pass. But they did seem to continue on with their friendship as if nothing really happened. So I was like, okay then, you know? But in terms of Agatha's relationship with Charlotte, it did seem as though they continued to be good friends. And it was kind of like a you scratch my back, I scratch yours type of thing. It does go back and forth between present and the past, but most of it is in the past. And we see obviously that Charlotte does end up with 15 kids, and eventually do see that Charlotte has a conversation with George about his illness, and she's just like, do you love me? You know what I mean? There's a whole scene like, do you love me? That's all I need to know. And George gives this whole passionate long answer, and it's now a thing on TikTok. It's just like, if my man don't say this to me, I don't want him, basically. But what man in today's day and age are you going to hear say those words? Like, let's be real with ourselves, okay? This is not a rom-com. This is not a drama. It's real life. Basically, they have this come to Jesus moment where she, of course, accepts George for who he is, his illness and all, and George feels okay to share all of himself with Charlotte. And I think that they definitely have a lot more growth in terms of a storyline. If they want to do a part 2 for Queen Charlotte, I still think that it is doable. What I do find sad though a little bit is the ending in terms of Brimsley. I was a little sad for him because he was dancing by himself in one scene, and in the scene before that I think it transitions from him dancing with Reynolds and then dancing by himself, and I'm just like, so did Reynolds die? Is he still alive? Did he just get fired? Like, what is going on? You know, like, there's a lot of theories being whirled around, but it just seems very sad because he does seem to have a very lonely life, just, you know, walking around with the queen, making sure she's good. But it's like, well, who makes sure you're good? So there's a lot going on. There's still a lot that you could really talk about with regards to their storyline, because obviously, you know, when it ends, it just kind of cuts when they seem to be in a good place with their relationship and marriage. But I'm sure obviously in terms of a lifetime in between, we still need to talk about that if they choose to, you know what I mean? So it ends with George. He does seem to be in a not so lucid state, but we do find out that one of their kids, at least Charlotte, that's what she was coming to tell him, that one of their kids that she kind of forced to get married, they were expecting a child with their wife. It's seeming like everything is good, but it gets even more heartwarming when, you know, obviously George, like I said, he's not in a lucid state in this scene, and he goes under the bed to talk to Charlotte. He isn't really talking to Charlotte. He's just kind of talking past her, having a conversation in his head with himself, basically. And she, in that moment, is just like, okay, he's having one of these stints, so he's not really lucid, so I'm just gonna go under the bed. And that's when she calls him Farmer George, because I think he kind of calls himself that when he's in his other state and not really present. She goes under the bed and she tells him like, hey, we're having a grandchild, you have an heir. And I don't really think he necessarily understood what she was saying. However, he was like, you didn't jump over the wall. You didn't go over the wall. And she was like, yeah, I did it. And I thought that was cute because it was kind of like a, you didn't leave me. You know what I mean? You accepted me, flaws and all. So it was sweet. It was a sweet little ending. I really like the costumes too. However, historical accuracy would probably say otherwise. I watch a lot of channels where they do deep dives about like the costumes and how accurate they are to actual clothing back in that time period. So I do think that they probably have a lot to say, and they probably be like, yeah, no, not really, you know? But either way, I thought this was a pretty well-written show. A lot of bits and bobs here and there, a lot of character plots to follow. So yeah, I was really impressed. I liked it. But y'all let me know your thoughts down in the comments. I'm done rambling, okay, for now, until I have another video to shoot. I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.